Our last but not least speaker is Ariane Antal. She is a senior fellow here in Berlin at the Wissenschaftszentrum für Sozialforschung in the Science Policy Group. And she's a distinguished professor at the Audencia Nantes School of Management and an adjunct professor of organizational development and intercultural management, also here in Berlin at Technical University. For about 10 years, she led an international research group at the Wissenschaftszentrum Berlin on artistic interventions in organizations. So it's not just artistic practice in museums, but she has researched on the more wider scope of artists actually intervening in organizations, which led to a survey of over 100 case studies that were being investigated, leading to numerous publications, of which are some of the more recent ones. One called Learning Organizations, Extend the Field, that was published in 2014 together with Peter Meusburger and Laura Sorzana, and Artistic Interventions in Organizations, Research, Theory and Practice, which was very recently, last year, published in 2016 with Ulla Skjöldberg and Jill Woodilla, and Moments of Valuation, also published last year together with David Hutter and Michael Stark. Now the microphone is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I feel like I'm a real outsider here. I've got all these artists and museum people, and I'm coming in as a researcher who've been studying lots of different kinds of organizations in the hopes that I can bring you some insights that resonate with what you've been saying and maybe give more ideas about how to make this kind of thing, make this kind of activity even more generative than you've already managed to do. So thank you very, very much. I did do a little bit of research about the Naturkunde Museum, but I'm not talking about that. I'll just talk about the research in other organizations. But I'm hoping that in the course of these 2 days, you will talk with people here from Lernkultur, an organization that's been accompanying the process here at the Naturkunde Museum. So one of them is behind the camera there, another one is sitting quietly in the middle. I hope that you will take advantage of what they've learned about this process, because I think they've got an original way of collecting feedback from the participants, from the people who are engaging with the processes. So learn from people who are sitting out there, not just from those of us who are standing out here. What I do want to do as an academic, I always have to use my definitions to be clear what I am talking about. And I consciously chose in setting up my research program at the Wissenschaftszentrum to take a very broad definition of artistic interventions, namely when people, products or practices from the world of the arts enter organizations that are not in the art world. So a lot of our interventions happen with artists, but there are some that happen just with the products from the world of the arts, and there are some consultants who are bringing in artistic practices to also engage with employees in organizations. So I'm not valuing any of one of those models more than the other. I'm using the breadth of it so that we can understand which end up by being more powerful, which are being more generative. The artistic interventions sometimes last just a few hours, and I've had cases where a year later people still remember what happened that day in September a year ago, working with people from the theater, for example. Others last days, months, or years, and I think that the example we have here is one of the biggest types that's extending over several years and in a constant process of trying to learn from one moment to the next. I've seen all different kinds of art forms being used. So this morning we had an example where they're only using the visual arts. In the other organizations I've studied around Europe, I've seen textile artists, there's been theater, quite a lot of theater, different kinds of sound artists, poets, writers, just basically everything. So maybe there's some that haven't yet been tried, but my sense is glass, so many different kinds. And it seems less a matter of the art form than the connection between the organization and the artist that seems to matter, or between the question that's being asked, but not necessarily the art form that matters. All kinds of organizations, so whether it be a museum here, the Danish Defense Ministry has worked with an artist for quite a long time, the German packaging companies, a medium-sized German packaging company has been working with an artist for various issues. So there's a wide range of different kinds of organizations, and I haven't found any particular pattern of one kind of organization being more effective in its use of it, being more interested in it. It depends very much on the people in the organization I think somebody mentioned it this morning, the courage to try it out. The reasons I've seen are extremely diverse. I think, as we heard already, sometimes it's the artist who initiates it with curiosity, saying, I'd like to try something out in this space. Sometimes it's a manager, it's some place in the organization saying, this could be interesting, we could do something. And then they need to sell it upstairs. And as we've heard, sometimes selling it upstairs is one of the toughest jobs that you've got if you're initiating the idea from the inside. And sometimes it is somebody from above, top of the organizations. A key actor are intermediaries who are building bridges between the world of the arts and the world of organizations, and sometimes they're the ones who initiate it. They contact an artist, they contact an organization and say, maybe you can do something together. I think one distinguishing feature is how much active participation members of the organization have in the process. We have some where the artist, it's essentially, I would say, artist dominated, so that the artist chooses the space and decides what he or she is going to do, and the employees in the organization are almost irrelevant. Other times the employees are very central to triggering an idea, to being a source of inspiration, but not necessarily working on the process. And in other times it's actually employees working very closely with the artist on a particular process. So the entire range is possible. And I think one of the most important features for what happens, how much value can be generated from it, from the experience, is how much reflection is actually foreseen in the process by the artist with participants in the organization, how much is foreseen by the intermediary, if an intermediary is involved, how much reflection is also supported by management. And we'll talk about that again in a moment. What actually seems to me to be happening in all these different kinds of artistic interventions is that they can create an interspace in the physical and social space in the organization, in which, in that time, in that space, because it's always in some way a special time, special space, they can suspend the existing norms of how we do things, how we think about things, how we relate to things, how we relate to questions, how we relate to one another. That can be suspended so that alternative ways of thinking, of behaving, of doing, of relating to things, to spaces, and to people can be experimented with in that interspace. What I find very powerful is that artists, we've heard the term, the artists who've been speaking today have talked about their research a lot. And I think what's very interesting is that they combine inquiry with action. I think maybe that's where you're going a bit, also Mr. McGregor. As an academic, we do a lot of the inquiry stuff, and then our action is usually limited to writing. And we hope that somebody will follow up with action and read it, and then maybe somebody will follow up and turn it into something. But with the artist, there's always some form of action that follows the inquiry. And I think that is for the people in the organization who have that, who can engage with that, is a powerful eye-opener to what they could be doing with ideas, with feelings, with possibilities, that combining inquiry and then action. They engage employees more or less, as I defined it earlier, both individually and collaboratively, in memorable experiences, in something that is often unforgettable, that is the basis for conversations at the time that the artist is there or at the time that the exhibit is there, and often much, much later. And we think about all the impulses that we get, all the inputs that we get today, very few are actually memorable. Artistic interventions create the possibility for generating memorable experiences in an environment that's already very complex, that we can help us make sense of why are we here and what are we about. What I am struck by when artists are involved in the artistic interventions is they will work with any response. And you were talking particularly about wonder, and that strikes a chord in me, but what I find as important, if not more so, in organizations today, where everybody is trying to be mainstreamed and agreeing and harmonious, is that artists will work with any kind of response. Resistance, disgust, anger are all forms of energy, are all forms of response, and not something to be overcome and overwhelmed and pushed aside, but actually engaged with. I think for me that's a major difference between this kind of an artistic intervention and interventions that we pay a lot of money for when big consulting companies come in and try to make things happen in organizations. I've just got two slides. One to talk about some of the preconditions that I think are important in generating values with artistic interventions, and one that we'll talk a moment about what are the barriers to getting value out of it. And I really emphasize the word values. I think that one of the conversations we need to have, and we started with that a bit this morning, is the importance of understanding we need a different language to talk about what do we value from an experience, what do we value about life and work in our organizations, in our societies. And we've been limited by very technical vocabulary. Our MBAs, our engineers, our lawyers are limiting us in how we talk about value. And working with artists can open our eyes, our ears, and our other senses to formulating, expressing, discovering what really matters to us, and we need that together. And what I found is that to generate values with artistic interventions, first and foremost, it's really important if people experience the values for themselves. So they don't not be told what they're supposed to think or feel. That's important, but actually emotionally, physically experiencing it in some way that they define, that they have. For that, they need to feel safe. We're not going to engage in something if we're being observed and judged and evaluated and used for somebody else's purposes. So feeling safe is crucial. And the intermediary can play a very important role in helping making it safe for the artist and for the employees in the organization. Equally important, and there is where I'm finding the biggest gap in reality, is the equally important for generating values is if senior management engages in or with the process actively all along. I think that's a crucial factor. I've seen very interesting processes launched and people being very disappointed because there's no follow-up. And senior management plays a big role, for which he or she needs courage to trust the process. At the outset, there's the necessity to have the courage to try something that you just don't know where it's going to go. That's the whole point. We've had a couple of examples today where things really shifted. It turned out differently. You were just saying that the artist wanted to use something in the sound recordings. They don't exist. So suddenly the money goes to be spent on a boat to try and record then the love sounds, mating sounds of these fish. You cannot know in advance with an artistic intervention where it's going to go. So that means that takes a lot of courage for a manager in an organization of any kind. And I don't know which kinds of organization are more conservative, whether you happen in the museum world to be in a particularly conservative world or one more open to learning than some of the major corporations or tiny companies I've been studying. I don't know, but courage to take on the risk of opening yourselves as an organization and employees for an artistic intervention is a big step, but not enough. The barriers that I found to generating values from engaging in artistic intervention is first and foremost instrumentalization. If management or public relations or some department in the organization thinks that they will be able to use employees and use the artists to achieve their goals, then artistic interventions are not the right kind of approach. There may be other management tools where that's fine, that's the life of organizations, but artistic interventions require a will to engage, and for that I will not do it if I'm being instrumentalized to satisfy your needs at the cost possibly of my needs, whether I'm the employee or whether I'm the artist. Unrealistic expectations are also a barrier to achieving values, to generating values in the context of an artistic intervention. I've sometimes seen situations where an organization has tried to resolve a problem it's had in the past and thinks, so nothing else has worked, so we're going to get the artists to come in and solve our problems. Well, management has to maintain its responsibility for what's happened, for the problems it has in its organization. So it could be that if manager really engages openly, curiously with the artistic intervention, then new ideas, new energies may be released for it, but it's not the responsibility of the artist to make things good in the organization. Too narrow a definition of value, which is why I keep on emphasizing we need to develop a new vocabulary to just understand what are values that we seek and appreciate in organizations and society. and not enough time invested into the collaboration. Very often I'm hearing that if only I had invested more, if only we could have invested more time in it, we would have gotten even more out of it. Lack of follow-up often leads to cynicism. People in the context of the interspace of an artistic intervention are often so energized and excited. They've discovered that they can do more than they could have imagined beforehand. So your sense of wonder, your sense of we can achieve more, a desire and a belief that we could do it, and then no follow-up, can lead to cynicism and a great deal of frustration. And possibly the greatest barrier is an attitude of knowing, rather than one of curiosity and humility. So unfortunately, I have to admit, I've seen some artists go in with a sense of knowing, rather than actually wanting to learn from the context in which they're working, from the human context, from the physical context. But almost always, artists go in with a desire for co-learning. Too often, top management brings in artists thinking it's going to help them learn if he or she does this with them. If the various actors in the organization, particularly at the top, go in with an attitude of knowing rather than curiosity and humility, you will have much less value generated out of the experience collectively. Individually, people may get it, but collectively, less so. So I would wish for all of us that we would understand the value that artists do have already for the importance of not knowing. Engaging in a situation from a stance of not knowing has much, much more potential in it than what we're currently doing in our universities and our MBA programs and our law training. And I don't know how you're training your people in museums, but we need more artists to help us understand the power of not knowing.